We're just $28 shy of what we did for our fundraiser from last year. So if you're still looking to, if you'd like to push us over the edge and just make us $2 more than last year, a $30 contribution, be welcome. Also, our bird feeding fund is in need of funds. I see Tom Stone has been out filling feeders at George Wythe. So we're back in action with that for the winter. And we generally spend between $1,100, $1,200 a year for feed. And most of that comes from contributions from people like you. We have a little bit in our budgets reserved for bird feed, but not that much. So again, but thank you all for memberships and for donations and your support. We really do appreciate it. Speaking of bird feeding, I was at Hartman Reserve yesterday, and I see they've rebuilt again the bird feeding station behind the new nature center. It really looks great. They had to do some landscaping work with a dozer and some trees and things. So it's bare ground for now, but that'll be developed into pollinator habitat and habitat for birds. But believe it or not, they have 20 bird feeders up that are full right now. And this would be a good time to be checking things out. You might find a redpoll over there. I see some people who even had an evening grosbeak come into their feeders. So we're getting a little bit of a winter push. Red-breasted nuthatches and other birds that are starting to show up for the winter. So get over there and check that out. I see they're going to be doing a brick for birds thing that we'll get more information out to you on that as it comes. We may buy a brick for Prairie Rapids Audubon for that. I see we have a new advertiser for our newsletter. And thank you, Linda and Joel, for doing another great newsletter. Do a really fantastic job. It's Wapsie River Pines, and they're a good source for native plantings. Start thinking for the spring for trees and for native plants. They're north of Cedar Falls. And I want to thank you too to Candace. She does a wonderful job on her newsletter. It makes it so easy to be able to do things, not only to get our links to our programs that we have going on right now, but also links to a lot of other great things. It's changing all the time. Thank you, Candace. You do a fantastic job with it. And when I get on this meeting, all I had to do is go gopraz.org, click on the link, and it's there. She also has archived our meetings from way back to 2014. And minutes for the meetings and who is the speaker and some synopsis. And our last two are also on there if you've missed them and you want to see it or see it again. The meetings have been recorded, our speakers, and we've had some really good ones. So check that out. Christmas bird counts will be happening this year. Check me if I'm wrong. I think Francis is December 19th and 20th. And the difference this year with COVID, you're kind of on your own. We won't be meeting for lunch, and we won't be doing our compilation dinner like we usually do. But you're able to go out safely with somebody you know or by yourself. You can check with Francis Moore on that. There's information that will be probably on the website, and also it's in our newsletter about more about that. So if you want to get involved, get a hold of Francis Moore. We'll look forward to our January meeting coming up, second Tuesday in January with Jared McGovern. He's with the Mississippi River Museum, and he'll be doing a program on flexing your muscles of Iowa, and some other interesting things. He's a great speaker. We've heard him on the radio before with Charity Nebby, and have some interesting information to share. I have for right now. We're still getting people coming in, Francis or Candace?
Another one just came in.
Okay, I think
so they're still coming in. It's slowing down though.
Okay.
Got 36 viewers on right now.
Fantastic. So if you want to have a comment about a bird you've seen or something you want to share with us, or a question for our speaker, hit the chat button and you can put that on there, and Candace will deal with that, and we'll deal with that at the end of the program. So without further ado, I want to welcome Craig Meyers from over in the Ames area. I've known Craig and Scott Garrett that's on. We've traveled together to Costa Rica and got to know him there a little bit. Know him as a fantastic photographer, really a wonderful man with conservation and everything else. He's been all over the world photographing wildlife and bears in particular. And I know when I've been to Jim Pease's house, Jim has one of his photographs, I think it's of a polar bear, proudly posted, hanging on the wall. So, but Craig has a lot of experience with backpacking and travel and education. He's a member of the Story County Conservation Board. He's been working on Iowa history materials for quite a while and spent a lot of his career as a media specialist and technology coordinator. And he's I would say, multitasker. He could be able to do a lot of great things. So I've heard good things about this program on grizzly bears. When we had Vern Fish here, that was last year or the year before, people were asking, oh, it'd be nice to see some photos on grizzly bears that Vern had way up in northern Canada on his kayaking trip. So here we go. We'll welcome Craig Meyers, and you'll see his background there. It's actually his backyard previously without the wind blowing. Some beautiful leaves. It's a nice backdrop. Craig, take it away, buddy.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here. I'm really sorry you couldn't be there in person tonight. For one thing, I am from Waterloo and grew up in Waterloo, and I went to college at UNI. Would have been nice to see some of the old home territory again. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll kind of see if we can get this going. As soon as I find the right screen to share, there we go. And there you see my presentation, completely dark screen. Let's move ahead. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I want to make sure my microphone wasn't muted or something. Okay, well tonight I want to talk to you about one of my favorite places that I've visited and I continue to visit over time. I want to talk a little bit about the bears of Katmai. And so first thing is, what's a Katmai? And Katmai is where that red pin is located. That's the Katmai National Park and Preserve in Alaska. And that kind of amoeba-looking blob in the lower right is Kodiak Island. So you can see that the Katmai itself is on the mainland of Alaska, and I'll talk a little more about where that is in a moment. Probably the toughest part that's about getting to Katmai is just plain, it's hard to get there. My journey to Katmai usually starts with for me, a drive to Minneapolis from Ames, and then I get on a plane and fly to Anchorage, and then catch another plane and fly on to Kodiak. Usually do an overnight in Kodiak, and then transfer to one of these guys. This is an old de Havilland Beaver, kind of the classic bush plane of Alaska. It's one of the few ways you can get to Katmai from Kodiak Island. It's about an hour's flight across the Shelikof Strait over to the mainland to a place called Kukak Bay is where we usually end up going. And of course, we're photographers, so everybody's taking pictures constantly, seems like. So let's talk a little bit about Katmai. Katmai National Park and Preserve is on the Pacific side of the Alaskan Peninsula, covers 4,093,077 acres, or 6,295 square miles. So like lots of things in Alaska, it's big. I have a good friend of mine that lives in Fairbanks, and he likes to tell his Texas friends that they could divide Alaska in half and Texas would still be the third largest state. Katmai was originally established as a national monument in 1918. It was originally established to protect an area called the Valley of the 10,000 Smokes. And that got that name because the park contains as many as 18 volcanoes, 7 of whom have been active since 1900. The eruption of the Novarupta volcano in 1912 covered that valley with volcanic flow up to 700 feet thick. So they're pretty significant there. It was left pretty well undeveloped until the 1950s. And then it became part of the National Park and Preserve in 1980 as part of the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act. It gets really very few visitors there just because of its remoteness. You can drive there from King Salmon if you fly in over on the other side of the park, but to get to this coast, yeah, you can't get there by vehicle. It has 497 miles of coastline, and I just can't get over it. It's a truly wild place. There are some areas, some lodges have been established so that you can get in. Visitors can actually come to the coastal areas. This is the kind of an aerial shot of the Katmai Wilderness Lodge in Kukak Bay. It's kind of an interesting place. It's sort of, I say sort of, within the national park, but actually this is on land that was actually owned by the Russian Orthodox Church prior to the formation of the national park. So they're allowed to keep their land over there, and so they're completely surrounded by national park, and they kind of live by the rules of the park, but it's actually private land, which is kind of unusual. But the only way to get there, of course, is float plane or boat. And all supplies to the lodge come over by air. Here you can see all the gear that's been packed into that Beaver, plus 6 passengers as we flew over. You can reach Katmai by boat from Kodiak, but the Shelikof Strait is also known for being very rough waters, very unpredictable. So they have a hard time even between spring and fall bringing the boats over from Kodiak Island. Just they have to watch the weather very closely to even get them there. Out here, it's not uncommon at the lodge to have bears literally in the front yard. I know it might be a little hard to see, but in the upper right, in front of that kind of scraggly looking tree, are 2 grizzly bears standing up there sparring right off the corner of the lodge. As you can see here, they travel right through the yard fairly often. One of the things I learned about the first day there is when I'm about to leave the cabin where I've been sleeping and want to go up to the lodge for breakfast in the morning, it's a good idea to look out the window and see who else is in the yard before you step out there. This bear was right out, again, right off the porch of the lodge. And you kind of wonder, well, how close was that? Well, those of you who are photographers, I can tell you that was taken with a full frame camera and a 70mm lens. And this fellow actually got a fair bit closer than I wanted him to that day. So they come right through the yard pretty regularly. But bears are really just a piece of the ecosystem of the area. Wildlife diversity is pretty tremendous. Bald eagles are really common in the area. You see them pretty often. They fish in the coastal and inland waters in the area. This one, for instance, has a needlefish in its beak that it's picked up out there, headed back to the nest with. They frequently nest on small rocky islands that are just barely separated from shore, gives them protection against predators that may raid the nest when they're away, and keeps them isolated a little bit. And if you hang around too long, they tell you about it. That's what this one's doing to me. So we try not to disturb the wildlife when we photograph them, but sometimes you never quite know what their level of comfort is until you've crossed it sometimes. But they're beautiful birds, and I can't get tired of photographing bald eagles. Can't do it. I see them all the time, and I keep doing it anyway. This is a nest on top of one of those little islands right off the shore, and I was able to go ashore, crawl up a hill on the backside, and peek over the hill and get a look down into the nest here. And you can see this mom here. And unfortunately that day, those two little fuzzy lumps down in the lower right are two young eaglets down there, and they just would not raise their heads and cooperate with me that day. So I have a photo of fuzzy lumps rather than eaglets, I guess. Okay, another bird that we see up there fairly commonly. Anybody know what that one is?
Would it be a herring gull?
That's close. It's close. That's actually a glaucous wing gull, and identified basically with the red spot on the bill, gray wingtips, and the pink feet. They're very commonly found up there. I have a few. They also tend to interbreed with California gulls, so sometimes they vary a lot in coloration. You see these guys kind of all over the place along the coast. Very common bird up there. On the water. Here's another common one. Anyone have an idea about this one?
Black-legged kittiwake.
Black-legged kittiwake. You guys are good. You didn't know there was going to be a quiz tonight, did you? Yeah, kittiwakes are very common in the area. They nest on rocky islands and rocky shoreline out there. And I usually like to go up there in the spring of the year. It's not uncommon to see them fighting over nesting materials off those nesting sites up there. I just think they're beautiful birds. Kind of understated in coloration, but they're really fun to watch in the air. And you can see they do have a bit of color, but again, identified by black legs, black wingtips, pretty common sight up there. I'll bet somebody knows what that one is.
Black oyster catcher.
Yeah, American oyster catcher, yep. And that's one of the ground nesters in the area. This one was nesting on a gravel bar right above the tide line. And you can see she's kind of got her nest tucked away between two little pieces of driftwood. And they'll let you get fairly close. They're typical ground nesters in that if she thinks you're getting a little too close, she'll jump up and pretend she has a broken wing and try to lead you off away from the nest. So they're kind of fun to watch. But I think they're just really pretty birds. And I can't stop taking pictures of them when they're around. How about this one? Anybody know what that one is? No takers. That, I believe, is a semi-palmated plover. or plover, however you decide to pronounce that. This one we found nesting on a sandbar just above the tide line, just off the lodge one day. And there are the puffins. Anybody know what kind of puffin? What do you think, Tom? Okay, that's a tufted puffin. It's one of the 2 species we see in the area. You can kind of see that tuft of feathers that go above the eye and come back along the top of the head and behind. Kind of what identifies them. You can see it a little better in this one. They're kind of not real large birds. I've always been after good photographs of puffins in flight. And I'll be honest, I really don't have any because they fly like bullets. They really are quick. And I'm always ended up trying to photograph these guys from a boat in rough seas, and it's rolling like crazy, and they're very difficult to get. This is another tufted puffin. He's trying to get airborne here, and he's running across the water about to take off. Here's the other variety of puffin in the area. This is the horned puffin. You can see that little horn-like projection coming up off the eye. He doesn't have the little hairdo coming across the back of the head there. Kind of see the difference between the two. They're really interesting birds. I don't see a lot of them. They're kind of hard to photograph. So I keep trying though. Every year I want to go after puffins when I'm there. And another common sight up in the area are harbor seals. And you can see them out on little rocky crags like this. Oftentimes down in the water, getting curious here, or on rocky islands and on the shoreline. What really intrigues me about harbor seals is that coloration. You very commonly see that bicolor effect, light on one side, dark on the other. And I can always imagine how effective that is if you're being chased through the water by an orca, for instance. And depending on the color of the water, you know, it's chasing you and then you roll over and it just disappears. You know, I think it's just a masterful bit of camouflage. And here's one just laying out on a bed of kelp along the shoreline. Another one taking a rest on just a chunk of rock along the shore. And some more birds. Anybody have an idea what this one is?
Harlequin duck.
Harlequin duck.
Harlequin duck. Yeah, I've always been after photographs of these guys. And last year I was there, was able to get a few. This guy here is doing their thing, trying to get airborne, running across the water, trying to take off. And eventually they make it, but they're just very colorful. And I love watching them. Great critter to try to photograph. And then one of the most common critters along the shoreline there, everybody wants to see sea otters. And this was an animal that was basically almost harvested to extinction. A lot of people say they were hunted to extinction. I like to say they were harvested because really they were harvested for their fur. It started back when the original Russian settlers and trappers moved into the area and began taking the fur for use in making hats and stoles and that sort of thing. They used to be able to actually just paddle a kayak out and paddle up to them and club them over the head and pull them inside. They weren't very wary of human beings, and that's why they were so many were killed off. And they're protected now, and they're coming back quite a lot. Here's mom with a young pup on her belly. I think they're very interesting animals. They live virtually their entire lives in the water. They eat, sleep in the water. They breed in the water. They give birth in the water. They are truly waterborne creatures. That coat is so thick it can protect them even from the cold of the water in the area. Here's a mom with a pup on her back. And very rarely do you see them out of the water. I think in the number of times I've been there, I've seen one out of the water maybe 2 or 3 times. It's not a very common sight, but even though this one's wet, you can see how thick that coat is. I always say this guy here looks a lot like Wilford Brimley. You just put glasses on him and that would be him right there, you know, but neat animals, really neat animals. And last year at the lodge, on the last evening in the tide flat out in front of the lodge, this fellow came walking by on the tide flat looking for something to eat. This is a gray wolf. And you don't see them too often because they're pretty wary, but they're around. You hear them up there. In the past, around the lodge where I stay, I've seen lots of red foxes. This last year, there were no foxes because the wolves had moved in. And the foxes had vacated the area or were killed by the wolves. So it's kind of a treat to get to see him, but he didn't get too close. But Alaska and Katmai is really about the bears. With the latest info that I could find, there are roughly 2,200 bears in Katmai National Park. So what kind of bears are they? That's always the question. Any guesses?
Alaskan brown bear.
Alaskan brown? Any other guesses?
It's a grizzly bear.
Okay, could be. We'll talk about that. Well, really, it depends on where you are. Notice this fellow, he's kind of torn up. Notice that hind leg, he's got a flap of skin torn off. He's all scarred up. This guy's been through some life here. But in Alaska, what those bears are called really depends on where you are. If you're within 100 miles of the coastline, generally they're known as coastal brown bears. If you're more than roughly 100 miles inland, they're called grizzly bears. They're distinguished from black bears by their size. They're quite a lot larger, and they have that characteristic hump between the shoulders that black bears just don't have. Again, within around 100 miles of the coast, coastal brown bear. Further inland, generally it's a grizzly bear. But guess what? It's exactly the same bear. They're the same species. Arctos ursus horribilis is the species. And the brown bears on the coast tend to be a little bit larger than grizzlies inland because they have a richer diet of seafood. And so they gain a little more weight. And you'll hear me tonight call them by both names, but it's the very same species of bear, no difference. The word grizzly, or the title grizzly, actually comes from those white-tipped, grayish-looking hairs on the bear's coat. And many years ago, the naturalist George Ord confused the word grizzly, G-R-I-S-L-Y, and grizzly, G-R-I-Z-Z-L-Y, from Lewis and Clark's journals and their description, and named the subspecies horribilis, basically translated horrible bear. Because if you've read any of the accounts from Lewis and Clark, you know they had some almost unfortunate encounters with grizzly bears on their trip to the West Coast. I said they were larger than black bears. Big black bear may weigh around 400 pounds. Some of them may go as high as 500, I understand. Grizzlies can approach 1,000 pounds in size. So they're big fellows. And when you get up close, you understand just how big those really are. And again, they have that hump between the shoulders. It's a muscle mass that's used primarily for digging and tearing. They can be hugely powerful diggers when they're digging out a den site or moving something. I've seen them pick up large logs and just throw them aside. Or they can be really delicate when they're digging for clams on a tidal flat. The claws of the brown or grizzly bears are different than black bear claws. The claws of these bears are longer and less curved, and those can be as long as a human finger, just the part that's showing right there. Do you know why black bear claws might be more curved and shorter? Any ideas? Well, black bears live in a different place, and those shorter, more curved claws are more suitable for climbing trees. And that's not so necessary to these bears. Grizzly bears can definitely climb trees. There's no question of that. But they don't often do it, especially in this area, because there aren't any trees big enough really to support their weight. So you rarely, I've never seen a grizzly bear in a tree. There's just are no trees big enough in that area. In terms of diet and what these bears eat, they're truly the apex predator of their area. They're the biggest, baddest thing around. They're true omnivores, which means they eat absolutely whatever's handy. I've seen them eat anything from insects to moose, anything in between. They're happy to lap up ants and moths, or they're happy to take down a moose when they can. It's whatever's available is generally what they're after. They're not always successful. Shot this in a tidal flat right off in front of the lodge one year. Normally when the tide's in, there are two small islands opposite the lodge. And when the tide's out, they're no longer islands. This becomes a big open tidal flat. The tides are huge in the area. The difference between low tide and high tide can be 20 feet or more in this area. So this floods considerably at high tide, but at low tide, you can walk across it. And one evening, this cow moose came down off what normally would be the center of one of those islands, and she had a newborn calf. This calf was still wobbly on its feet, so it wasn't moving very, very quickly at all. There were 3 bears digging clams out on that tidal flat when she walked out there. 2 of them just ignored the moose. The third one didn't. The third one circled all the way around the bay and came up what would be off to the left here, came up behind the moose and stalked up behind. And when it ran out of cover and got as close as it could, it charged in and attacked. And the cow, in this case, kicked the living daylights out of that bear and drove it off. And the bear didn't give up. It actually came back and attacked again, made a second run at it, and the cow drove it off again. So that calf got to live another day. So it shows how effective they can actually be, even against the grizzly bear. Now, I think if probably 2 bears had made that attack, we would have had a different outcome, but that worked out. Having said that, it's probably a fact of life that probably 50% of those calves won't survive the first year in that area. When I first went to Alaska to photograph bears, what I never understood was how many clams grizzly bears eat along the coast. I never thought of them out digging clams, but they sure do it. I'm not sure exactly how they can find them. I think probably their sense of smell is what does it, but I've seen them roam around and start digging holes, and I've rarely seen them dig an unproductive hole. They usually can find them pretty easily. They kind of each have their own method of eating a clam. This gal's it's not a great photo of this gal. She actually has a clam in her mouth. And what she's doing is propping it up in the sand. And she props it up on end. And what she did, then she took those claws and she pried the shell open and ate the clam out of the middle. And it kind of reminded me of a young kid eating an Oreo. Now, but there are different methods. And this fellow here, now I don't know about you, but to me that looks like a serious bear. He really looks like he would love to wander over and take a chunk out of the nearest photographer that he could find. And what's happened here is this fellow had a different method of eating clams. He just popped the whole thing in his mouth, crushed it, and ate it. And that's what's happened right here. He's just crushed a clam in his mouth. And that's actually the juices from the clam that are dripping out of his mouth. He's not really drooling over the nearest photographer. But again, I think he looks like a serious bear. It's a big bear. One of the ways you can kind of tell, I think, is if a bear's head looks large in relation to its body, it's the smaller bear. If the body looks large in relation to the head, that's a good sized bear. This guy's a big one. I've oftentimes seen them eating barnacles off the rocks on the tidal flats. I never thought of a bear eating barnacles, but they do that fairly often. But the truth of the matter is 80 to 90% of those bears' diet is vegetation. We tend to think of them as meat eaters and predators, but the vast majority of their diet is vegetation. When they emerge from the dens in the spring, they're just looking for nutrition, as much as they can find, as quickly as they can find it. They haven't eaten in months and they're hungry. It's one of those facts of nature that it's kind of an amazing coincidence that right about the time the bears come out of the den is when those grasses and sedges along the coast are reaching their peak nutritional value. So I think nature kind of found a way that things evolved to work out along those lines. As we see climate change happening in the area, what's happening now is some of those grasses are maturing earlier before the bears can come out of the den. So we're seeing a little decline in that nutritional value by the time the bears emerge. So the bears aren't adapting as quickly as the plants are. They consume huge amounts of that vegetation. I've seen them graze in the meadows for literally hours at a time along the coast. And they eat a lot of sedges and any kind of grass they can find around there. This particular sedge meadow, we frequently see bears in is right at the coastline. Again, the tides are so severe there that these areas are often flooded as the tide comes in. And oftentimes they're getting double duty here, because if you look, you can't see it in the photos, but if you look closely, oftentimes you can see herring eggs on the grasses and sedges that have been flooded at high tides. So yeah, I have lots of pictures of bears grazing. That's what we see the vast majority of time. In the springtime, at least. They eat all kinds of different things. This one's eating eelgrass out on a tidal flat. I think my bear guide even said he'd never seen a bear do that before, and I'm not sure he has since, but this fellow found something he liked out there. Again, big bear. This one's eating something here I didn't think hardly any critter would eat ever. It's eating parsnip. And most of us won't go near parsnip. We know better than to touch it. But this gal here was munching it down pretty readily. In fact, they kind of appear to like it a lot. The only other thing I've ever seen eat parsnip is goats. I don't know what else would, but they don't seem to have a problem with it. Their diet kind of changes throughout the year, depends on what's available and what's higher in nutrition at the time. This is a big bear here. We talk about getting close to a bear. Now, I shot this with a telephoto lens, of course, but this bear walked right past me as it was feeding, and I could hear it chewing the grass when it went by. I could hear it breathing when it went by. And after it passed, I paced off the distance from where I was standing to the nearest track, and it was right at about 15 feet. And it wasn't in a case where I was hiding or anything. We were standing right out in the open. The bear knew we were there and was pretty unconcerned with us. But you can see by the scars on this fellow that he's been through some tussles. The bears up there generally live solitary lives. They're not very communal most of the time. They establish a home range. The male's home range usually varies from around 200 to 300 square miles. So it's pretty large. Females, a little different. Their ranges are generally around 50 to 300 square miles. Now the bears are kind of territorial, but not overly so. They mark their territories, but the home ranges overlap fairly often, and they don't seem to really rigidly try to enforce them. I think the enforcement of their home range really kind of depends on what food's available and how much food is available. As long as there's sufficient food around, they're fairly unconcerned. They mark their territories with scent. Like one way is this one's rubbing its back on a tree. We always like to think he's scratching his back there, and he probably is, but he's really marking that tree with scent. You see that fairly often up there. Notice the claws. Good view of the claws on this fellow. They also mark their territory. They'll urinate on the ground and then stomp that scent into the ground to mark a territory. There's kind of a hierarchy in bears society, and it kind of goes from top down. The most dominant are the big adult bears, or the big adult males rather. They're kind of the top of the chain, and next would come females with cubs. They're sort of the next rung down. And after that would come young males and females without cubs. And you can see it in their interaction. When bears meet, they often kind of work to establish dominance among each other, and they do it without conflict most of the time. I've seen in that sedge meadow where we photograph bears fairly often, that time of year, I've seen as many as 6 bears in that meadow at one time. And they generally just give each other space. At that time of year, there's lots of food in the area. There's plenty for them to eat. And what they will do, though, I've seen many times as the bears come into the common area, basically, into that meadow, as the others notice it, a lot of times they'll stand and kind of show each other their profile so that they can sort of gauge each other's size. And they kind of know, I believe, that in conflict they can get hurt, and they'd rather avoid that as much as possible, I think, as anyone. I have seen times when there'd be 3 or 4 bears in that meadow, and maybe one of the big boars would come walking down off the hill and down into the meadow. And some of the smaller males especially will kind of look up and just decide that maybe the next meadow on down the coast might be a better place to be. And they'll just leave the place to them. So they generally give each other lots of space when they can. Bears usually start looking for den sites by early fall. They usually look for den sites on the higher mountain slopes where the deeper snows can insulate the dens. They enter dens usually by October or November. And once they get in the den, generally they get no nutrition of any kind in the den. They live entirely off body fat while they're there. They can lose up to 40% of their body weight during that denning period. It is possible for them to be out and about throughout the winter, but it really kind of depends on availability of food. And normally it's not very available in that area that time of year. Let's see, the males usually leave the den in March or April. The females leave the den in late April or May. Now think about that a minute and think about why that happens. Males leave in March, early April. Females emerge from the den in April or May, or late April or May. They spend up to half their lives in the den. Breeding usually occurs in June or July. The embryos begin to develop in the fall if the bear has achieved sufficient nutrition for the embryos to develop. Otherwise, they just dry up. Cubs are born usually in January, and they weigh less than a pound at birth. Kind of amazing for an animal that size. Cubs might weigh around 20 pounds when they emerge from the den in May. So any ideas why they leave the den later than the males? No, okay, well, if you think about it, grizzly bears, coastal brown bears are omnivores. When those big males, dominant males, leave the den, after spending months without food, they're hungry, and they won't hesitate to attack and kill bear cubs to eat them if they can get away with it. So nature has kind of found a way here. This pattern of coming out of the den at different times gives the males some weeks to eat and gather some nutrition and not be quite so starved by the time the young cubs emerge from the dens. So again, nature kind of found a way. Brown bears have the second slowest reproductive rate of all North American mammals. Anybody have any idea which North American mammal has the slowest reproduction rate? See, I knew I was going to quiz you tonight.
Would it be a porcupine, perhaps?
No, it's another Arctic species. It's the muskox, one that we don't think of much, probably. Females don't reach breeding maturity until somewhere between their 4th and their 9th year. They generally birth 2 cubs every 3 years. And again, they usually only breed every 3 years. We've all heard many times about how vicious and protective sow bears can be with cubs, and it's true, but they're not always so. If they're not really threatened and don't feel threatened, they're not so much. This couple sets of cubs with moms here I'm showing you right now. I'm within 25 or 30 yards of those bears, and we're just not being threatening. We kind of position ourselves in a spot and let the bear come to us. And this bear, for instance, was comfortable enough. She climbed up the hill above us and laid down and started nursing her cubs. And you don't get to see that terribly often. Cubs usually stay with their mother for 2 to 3 years. You can see that that birth cycle happening on around a 3-year cycle. The bears usually live to be 15 to 20 years old. And as far as a survival rate, as many as half the cubs do not survive to breeding age through starvation or just hard times or predation by larger bears. Only roughly half of them actually make it. In terms of bears' senses, you probably already know that bears have really poor eyesight. And I always heard years past that when a bear stands up at you like that, it's getting ready to charge. And we found out pretty quickly that's not true. They just have poor eyesight, and he's standing up to get a better look. I've never seen one charge off standing up like that, as many times as I've been there. The thing about the bears, they have very poor eyesight, but they have an excellent sense of smell. They can smell things as far away as a human can see. Their sense of smell is roughly 7 times more sensitive than a bloodhound's, and some say up to 2,100 times more sensitive than a human's. And there have been instances where they've been seen to smell a carcass from as far away as 20 miles. It's pretty impressive. They're really good swimmers, and they don't hesitate to go into the water. They swim very well. It doesn't slow them down that much. So how fast can they run? Well, let's think about how fast can a human run. So I've done a little running in my life, sometimes when I was being chased, but I've always heard that a 4-minute mile was pretty fast. Took people a long time to achieve that, and not all that many people do yet. Well, if we think of that, that's 15 miles per hour. And that's pretty fast for a human sprinter to go. These bears can run up to 35 miles per hour. So you've all heard the joke is I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. Well, in this case, that's probably true, because there's no way you're going to outrun these bears, and they can actually sustain that speed for quite a while. They can actually run a pretty good horse into the ground. They have a lot of stamina, and they move very, very quickly. So one question comes up is, why are Katmai bears so approachable? This is a place where you truly can get out and walk among grizzly bears. Well, they've had basically almost 40 years now since the park was formed, where they've interacted with humans in a non-threatening environment. There's no hunting allowed in the park. There's no hunting around. I mean, it's such a large park that they rarely encounter hunters at all. They really have very good interactions with humans, and they're pretty well habituated to humans being around. And it kind of comes down to, as one of the bear guides put it one time, he said, well, I guess they must think that, well, mom didn't seem to think that humans were a big deal, so I guess I don't either. And they don't pay a lot of attention to you, really. And we basically reinforce that relationship with our presence. People keep coming back to Katmai and interacting with bears, so they get used to it. I'm going to be very interested to talk with the guides up there this year on whether or not there's any difference in interaction since a year before last, since there was no, the park was basically closed this last year due to COVID. And so there were very few or no visitors in the area up there. It'd be interesting to see if bears react differently after a year off, provided they're able to get back in there this next year. So the question, because you're able to walk around and get among them, the question keeps coming up, are they tame? And I think that answer is definitely not. You still have to be careful around these bears. Bears are individuals, and I don't think anyone can predict how an individual bear will act in a given situation, but we can kind of know their behavior and in general take some precautions and interact with them kind of in an up and close manner. I shot this photo of that bear. I was laying flat on the ground. I was at 25 yards. I shot it with 200mm lens. So, and all it was doing there was looking for a better chunk of grass to eat. It wasn't really concerned with me at all. So, and what we try to do over there is observe their behaviors and pay attention to them, observe their space, and don't challenge their movements. One of the things we do is stay in groups. There's never been a recorded case of a bear attack on a group in Katmai if the group size was larger than 4. So what we tend to do as we move across areas that the bears are in, we stay in a single group. Remember, they have poor eyesight. And as you move across the area in a group, you tend to look more like one big thing rather than 5 or 6 little things. We don't get in their way. You know, I don't like getting in between 2 bears and one decides to move over and join the other. I don't want to be in between. So generally what we'll do is just kind of, you know, nonchalantly move out of their way and just give them a little space. Don't back off, but just move out of their way. Again, observe their behavior. Any animal, even dogs, or if we look at that animal, we look for signs that they may be getting agitated. For instance, one of the things I would watch is a bear's ears. If they're up like this, it's looking around, it's pretty casual, not being too bothered. If those ears are laid back on the back of the head, I know it's likely somewhat irritated. Another thing, you'll see bears sometimes yawn, and they're not doing it because they're tired. What they're doing is showing off their teeth. And you see them yawning, well, then it's time to kind of move a little further away, perhaps. When they get a little more agitated, sometimes they'll just snap their jaws together, pop their jaws. That's a really good indication that they're irritated with something. And they do that to each other, not just with humans. If something is bothering them, I guess only a bear knows what his personal space is. The other thing they do is what we refer to as a John Wayne walk, where they'll kind of rear up on or get up on their front legs and just kind of rock back and forth and walk back and forth, kind of swaying back and forth, kind of John Wayne style. That's an indication that that they're a little irritated at things. So you just kind of watch them and give them space when you need to, and we don't have too many problems. The other thing we're very, very, very careful about is we don't let them associate humans with food. We don't carry any food with us into the field. We might go out into the field all day, but generally we go out on a boat in the morning, boat around till we spot bears, and then go ashore and hike in and photograph. When it's time for lunch, we go back to the boat and we eat our lunch there, but we don't keep any human food around these bears. We don't want them getting the idea that when they see humans, they've got food and we can come over and take it away from them. And even at the lodge, they're very, very careful with garbage and food around the lodge, making sure there are no scraps or things tossed out and about. It's amazing at the lodge. I've actually seen times when the cook is standing out on the deck of the lodge barbecuing hamburgers on the grill, and there's bears in the yard 25 or 30 yards away, and they literally pay no attention to it because they don't really know about human food. They've not reacted to it. So it can be done. Okay, and the other big thing here is don't run or retreat. Prey runs. And when we're out among bears, you never want to act like prey. And the other thing we tend to do is not retreat. A bear comes toward us, we stand our ground. And that goes a long way. It works that way with a lot of animals. I've used it with aggressive dogs. Stand your ground, don't back away, don't act like prey. I will at times move off to the side, but I don't ever back away. We always stand our ground. And the vast majority of the time, the bear will kind of approach you, and then they'll see you're not going to move and they'll back off, or they'll go around you. Because again, there's a group of you and you look like a big thing. Now, I'll be honest with you, I would never act quite the same way to a grizzly bear that I saw in Yellowstone as I do with a bear I see in Katmai, because bears in Yellowstone have a lot more opportunities for bad interactions with humans. So I think the situation is different, and you have to just realize where you are. And listen to the bear guide. We have bear guides with us at all times. They're out there almost every day during the spring, summer, and fall. They know bear behavior better than any of us do. The question always seems to come up, do you carry a gun? And the answer is no. We never have carried a firearm out among the bears. They do carry bear spray. And I think my bear guide that I usually go with has been doing this for close to 20 years now, and he's never used his bear spray yet. It's a matter of watching bear behavior, taking simple precautions, and if you do that, you can actually walk among grizzly bears. It's truly phenomenal. Just by just taking those simple precautions, you can get up close to an apex predator. I don't know of anywhere else in the world you can get an experience quite like that. I think if you look at on the internet, you can find lists from time to time about premier wildlife viewing experiences, and Katmai is always on the list. And I absolutely believe that's true. Nowhere else can I get any kind of experience like this. And the first time I went there, I realized this isn't just a photography trip to go there. It really is, to me, one of those life experiences that you can't find anywhere else. So I hope that if you ever get the chance, you'll take the opportunity to go while we still can. I hope it stays in a situation that will allow us to visit for some time to come. So that's all I really have. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Craig.
So
Can you hear me
Craig,
okay?
there was a question.
Yes,
We have there's a few things on the chat.
oh, I'm sorry, I haven't been looking at the chat. I'm trying to get my stop share button to show up here, and I can't, in this black screen, I can't find my cursor. So let me do something different. That's better. Okay, I'll look in the chat. I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, that's okay. So the question is, how are the mosquitoes there?
Actually, I've never had many problems with mosquitoes. One year, a fellow emailed me because he was going for the first time, and he asked me how the mosquitoes are, and I told him that they're not much trouble because mosquitoes don't like to come out in the rain. Some years, first year I was there, it rained every single day. I think we had one afternoon when it didn't rain, and we went out and photographed bears in the rain. But for 7 days we photographed in the rain. But the last several times I've been there, the weather's been nice. I've never used mosquito repellent at the times when I was there. I don't know, it's just the right time of year, right set of conditions. They haven't been a problem. I won't guarantee that if you go there though.
How about black flies?
No, I've not been bothered by insects. Now, I've backpacked in Alaska before later in the year when insects were terrible. So I think it's just I usually go in early June, early to mid-June is when I like to go, because then we see a lot of the young of the year, and I see a lot more species that time of year. So they have not been a problem along the coast for us.
There's
Any
some
other questions?
Yeah, we have more questions, anybody?
Typically, how many people are in camp when you're up there taking pictures?
The most we've ever, I think the lodge can only handle up to 12 people at a time. We have the main lodge area, and that's mainly just kind of a large living room, and there's a kitchen area and a dining room up there. And other than that, there are those small cabins you saw maybe in that one of those first photos. And usually that cabin will hold bunks for 2 to 4 people, so that they can accommodate up to around 12 at a time. So, and oftentimes they take 2 boats out, so you're in 2 groups of half a dozen, something like that. So that's one of the things I like about it. They don't handle large groups. I wouldn't like to be out there and with 20 or 30 people. Wouldn't be as much fun. Let's see.
So there's another question in chat. Do you see many bears that are tagged?
You know, I've not seen tagged bears there. I'm sure the Park Service does tag bears. I think you see more over in the Brooks Falls area. There's more population over there. It's much more. It's visited much more often. That's where you get all of the photos of the bears fishing for salmon, is at Brooks Falls. And you can reach Brooks Falls by driving in from King Salmon. You fly into King Salmon, can drive in from there. And that's where all the people are. There are viewing platforms there to see bears, but basically you're assigned a 30 or 45 minute time slot at a viewing platform, and you get your slot, and then the next person has to come in, and it's not the kind of experience that I really kind of like. I much prefer over along the coast where I can go out all day long and look at bears all day long and not be in a crowded situation. There are some other lodges. There are lodges at Brooks Falls for sure. I think there's another lodge up near Hallow Bay to the north of Kukak Bay. That's a pretty common one up there. There's actually a strip of beach up there where people fly in to see bears. They take fly-in trips from Kodiak. That gets really crowded too. There's just a strip of beach where bush planes can land. There's been times when there are parking problems for bush planes up there. It's so crowded, so we generally avoid that area. I'm kind of a loner. I'd rather be out in the boonies, I think. Not that I don't like people, but when I'm around bears, I'd rather be in small groups. Let's see.
There's some comments there too, Candace, earlier.
I'm seeing them now. I finally got that up on my screen.
Oh, okay.
Evidently, I'm just learning about this Zoom thing myself, so I'll get it figured out. Yeah, thanks for the comments. I would love to see people up there. I didn't get to go this last year. I was planning to go this summer, and everything was closed due to COVID. There's no way to physically distance at the lodge. But the lodge managers did go. They were up there doing some maintenance and kind of keeping an eye on things. So I'm anxious to contact them. I'm planning to try to go up next spring. Again, I've been there. I've made this trip 5 times now. For a guy who was only going to do it once, and that was going to be my life experience and one and done, I can't stop going back. I generally go roughly every 2 years. I'm happy to do it. It's a great place. It's an amazing experience to see a close to 1,000-pound bear walk by you at less than 20 feet.
So I had a question, Craig. This is Candace. And can you speak to the different vocalizations that you might have heard? And do the vocalizations play a part in setting that hierarchy between the bears? I've
never heard much vocally from one of these bears, and I don't know why. That's a really good question. I've just never heard much at all. And sometimes when bears are up sparring or actually fighting, yeah, you can hear that. But as far as just general intonation between bears, I've never seen it. They've done it all visually.
That's interesting. Because, there's birds that will make a contact call as they're feeding. And with that many bears perhaps being in a meadow, I wondered if they would have a little grunt or a little kind of noise that they would make to just kind of, make their presence known. But yeah, so that's very interesting. Thanks.
That's very logical. And I can't say they don't do it. All I can say is I haven't heard it. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes when we first see these bears, they're at quite a distance. And generally, we just start wandering towards in their direction. As we approach these bears, we never walk. It's like approaching wildlife in general. We never walk right directly at them. We generally just kind of zigzag across and angle over towards them for a while, maybe stop for a while, wait till they're no longer paying any attention to us, angle a little closer. Or if we see that they're moving in a particular direction, a lot of times what we'll do is try to position ourselves up ahead of them and give them space so they can wander past. And it's always better trying to photograph wildlife if you can get ahead of the wildlife and let them come to you as opposed to you going to them. Another way to approach wildlife is some of my wildlife photography tricks is the old lost wallet trick. You ever heard of that? You're right out in the open, they see you, they know you're there, and they're a little wary and they're watching you. Sometimes you just look around, start looking around and wandering around like you're looking for something that you've lost and not paying any attention to them. That animal will actually kind of give up on you and look away and start ignoring you and let you work a little closer. Kind of an interesting technique. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
There was another question asking, would the bears be eating different foods at other times?
Oh yeah, definitely. Again, their diet changes throughout the year, just depending on what's available. Obviously in the fall, during the salmon run, they're all about salmon. During the rest of the year, they'll take whatever prey they can find. Again, I've seen them turn over logs, eat insects, dig up grubs, just about anything they can find. They're true omnivores. They eat it all.
So are there any other comments, Candace, that we needed to share from the chat room?
We had just Mark and Amy Dutton from Dyke who are joining us for their very first meeting, so welcome. And they reported that they were lucky enough to have evening grosbeaks on both October 30th and 31st. So wow. I'm incredibly jealous. That would be a live bird. So wow.
We need to be on the lookout for those as they're showing up in quite a few places.
Yes, yes.
Craig, what kind of camera equipment do you use and what size lenses are most often employed when you're taking those photos?
Okay, usually I take 2 cameras with me. I shoot Nikons, not because they're better than anything else. I happen to know another guy here that shoots Canons, and he's still an okay guy. That would be Tom. Uh, and his equipment works great too. I just got used to Nikons many years ago. So that's what I use. I carry two bodies with me all the time. I carry one with a 500 millimeter telephoto on a tripod, and I lug that big thing around, and it's heavy. And then I usually carry a second camera with a 70 to 200 millimeter zoom. And that's one I carry over my shoulder. Sometimes the bears get too close for the 500. So I'm able to quickly switch to the other camera at that point. But the 500 is a handful. It's not as big as some, but the lens itself weighs 10 pounds. So you put a camera on it plus a tripod, and you've got a lot to carry around during the day.
Well, we want to thank you for a wonderful program, Craig.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. And glad to have done it.
We'll look forward to having you back, or we can have you in person.
That would be great. I would love it.
Be eating homemade treats afterwards too. So
That would be great.
Craig,
so if there's any other comments from the group, we'll close. But yep, Craig.
hey,
Yeah.
Craig, have you traveled here in Iowa to film bears, the black bears up in northeast Iowa?
I have not, and that's a shortcoming. That's the bear I don't have photographs of, are black bears. Amazingly, I've got the coastal browns, I've got the inland grizzlies, I've got polar bears. I don't have any black bears, so that's one of my shortcomings. I have many.
As we all.
I'd like to. I have another program that I'd like to share sometime. If you're thinking of it, it's Wildlife of the Pantanal. I don't know if you know about the Pantanal. It's the world's largest wetland in Brazil. Really interesting place. I've been fortunate enough after I retired to be able to do some traveling and go places and see some animals that I normally wouldn't see around here. So that's been my kind of thrust for the last several years. But thank you all for attending.
We had a good group. It keeps getting more and more each month as we learn how to do this. So and again, if you want to see the program again or share it with somebody you know, take a look at the website. And Candace has all our programs archived down there where you can view it again. Learned a lot. Thanks a lot, Craig.
All right, great. Thank you
Thank you,
all.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to have everybody join us.
Take care.
You too.
Go for treats.